Today, we are going to discuss with our honorable guests what could be expected from the next president of the United States in the Arab region and in the Middle East in general. We know by now that the next president is going to be again Donald Trump, whom we knew in his first mandate from 2016 to 2020. And we like to know what he's going to do, what are going to be his policies in the Middle East. What's he going to do with the war in Gaza, with the invasion of Lebanon, with the human rights in the region, with the civil war in Sudan, in Syria, and in Libya, and many other Arab places. For this, I'm pleased and honored to have with me exceptional guests. Hawthorne, who is a former head and resident expert of Egypt Working Group in the US Department of State and former director of research at POMED, which is the Project on Middle East Democracy. Professor Marina Ottaway, Middle East Fellow at Woodrow Wilson Center and former head of the Middle East Program and senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Anthony Dworkin, whom I had the pleasure to meet 2 days ago, and he is senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations and visiting lecturer at Science Po. And Seth Binder, who is the director of advocacy at the Middle East Democracy Center and expert in the United States foreign policy. Ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to you, and I'm very happy to have you with me in this hour and the following hour to discuss all these problems. And I'm going to start with you, Amy. 2 days ago, I listened to a very insightful podcast called The President's Box, organized by the Council on Foreign Relations, where you and Stephen Cook discussed the role of the next president in the Middle East. I quote what you said. You said, though it is now the most dangerous moment in the Middle East, you are not optimistic that the United States is going to play an important role with the new president, and that it would be just fine to keep things from getting worse. But my question is this. Don't you think that things are going to get worse with Trump president in relation to war in Gaza, Lebanon, the possibility of just peace in the Middle East, and also for a possible democracy in the Arab region?
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the Cairo Institute for inviting us today. Many of us are here in the US are very tired. We were up late last night, so forgive us if we're not at our most energetic today. I have some coffee, which I may drink throughout. I'll say a couple of things at the outset. The first is that I guess 3 things about what we could expect from President Trump's second term. The first is that, I think quite strategically, quite cannily, on the campaign trail this time, he said relatively little about the Middle East. I think he just sort of sat back, said very few things. The things that he did say were pretty vague, and he kind of let the Democrats, fight among themselves over Gaza and Israel. So he hasn't, compared to some of his other policy plans, he hasn't given a very clear description or roadmap of what he wants to do. That's the first thing. So I think there's just some things that we don't know. Second of all, that being said, I think we can assume that many of the policies in the Middle East region that he pursued during his first term as president, that he will continue those or intensify them. We haven't seen any sign that he's, rethinking his approach. I think what is different now is that a significant part of the region is embroiled in this devastating war, and that wasn't the case in January 2017 when he took office. So I think things will get much worse for the Palestinians, potentially for people in Lebanon, for people in the region who are not aligned with Israel or who are not aligned with the ruling regimes. I think it will be a grim time, very grim time. But given, what we've seen from the Biden administration, I don't know if it will be a dramatic break. I think one thing that will be different, I feel pretty confident in predicting this, is that the foreign policy doublespeak of the Democratic Party, particularly on the Middle East, we will be rid of that. So we've had 4 years of the Biden administration talking a lot about the importance of democracy, standing up for democracy. We all remember when Biden took office, the catchphrase that they used was putting human rights at the center of their foreign policy. And obviously, we've seen the exact opposite of that in the region. Trump will strip away all of that doublespeak and happy talk, and he will just pursue a more brutal and less constrained and less humane policy than the Biden administration has, but without the rhetoric overcoating it, talking about the importance of human rights, etc. So I guess those are my, sort of initial thoughts, but I'm eager to hear from my my co-panelists. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to hear from Seth. Netanyahu called, and the celebrity now, where Ine was speaking about his policy in the Middle East. Netanyahu called Trump the best friend Israel had ever had in the White House. And Trump was reported by Washington Post as saying to the Israeli Prime Minister, "Do what you have to do." What does that mean exactly for Gaza? Means clean Gaza totally of its population, or just put a puppet government that would be under the command of Israel?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you, Cairo Institute, for having me, especially with this panel on a really timely topic, but also one, as Amy said, I think many of us are almost at a loss of words to sort of really try to pull our thoughts together and articulate anything. I think first, when we're talking about Trump's relationship to Israel, I do think it's important to acknowledge that many things that the former President Trump, and even on the campaign trail, that he said was just clearly anti-Semitic. So to say that he is sort of the greatest friend to Israel is, to my mind, problematic, even if the prime minister of Israel is saying it. I think the things he's pointing to or that he's thinking about is basically when President Trump was in office, he gave Prime Minister Netanyahu the wish list of things that he wanted. Across the board, allowing Israel to deepen its occupation, repression, and so on and so forth. And I think they expect much of that to continue. I think they also expect this sort of maximum pressure campaign towards Iran to resume, something that the prime minister has not been particularly happy with, where the Biden administration, especially early on in his term, came in and was going. So yeah, I mean, I think Netanyahu is incredibly excited about a return of Trump. I think many of the leaders across the region are similarly very excited about the return of Trump.
Thank you. Marina, I mean, do you agree that at least we got rid of the doublespeak of the Democrats? and that now we have straightforward president that is going to make things clearly worse concerning democracy, concerning human rights, the Palestinians in Lebanon, etc.?
I don't quite agree. I differ slightly, not because I think the policy of the Trump administration is going to be a good policy, but because saying that things are going to get worse is based on the assumption that the policy of the Biden administration was effective. Biden did a lot of talking, but in the end, he also let Netanyahu do whatever he wanted to do. I think in particularly the last few weeks, Biden was pathetic. He kept on saying, don't do it, have a ceasefire. But de facto, he put no real pressure. So in that sense, I don't think things are going to get worse. There is one small area in which things might get somewhat better. That is, Trump has shown through his, in everything he has done, not in the Middle East, that he's truly adverse to getting the United States into another armed conflict. And therefore, his support for actions against Iran are going to be, is going to be very muted. I am not sure. I mean, the Biden administration did not say so openly, but it's certainly the Biden administration supported the Israeli attack against Iran, the last Israeli attack against Iran, because Israeli planes don't have the range, they don't have the capacity to fly to and from Iran without mid-air refueling. And the only country that can provide mid-air refueling is the United States. So that the United States, all the evidence is that the United States was involved in that operation. I am not sure that a Trump administration would be willing to do so. Trump keeps on putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that he's not going to war, that one of the characteristics of his administration is that he put an end to all the wars the United States is involved in. So that is a slight change. In terms of curbing Netanyahu's policies, Trump will not try, but Biden did not really try seriously either. There was a lot of rhetoric, but not much substance.
That's right. Thank you. Anthony, Trump has always expressed his unconditional support for Israel, as has been mentioned, in whatever aggression that the Israeli government commit, whether in Gaza or in Lebanon or elsewhere. Some analysts think that this tough policy would give credit for other protagonist ideologies that see the relationship with Israel in existential terms, to encouraging thus more extremism in the region and less belief in the prospect of a peaceful solution for the conflicts in the region. And consequently, this would affect the United States interests in the region. Would you agree with that?
Yes, first of all, again, let me add my thanks. Very glad to be on this panel. It's an important subject on a difficult day. Yes, I think I would expect Trump to give a pretty clear message to Israel that, that there are no restrictions on what it can do in terms of how Israel has conducted its operations against Hamas, against the Palestinians in Gaza, against Lebanon. I agree with other panelists that Biden has been ineffective, but nevertheless, I think there are some steps that Trump would countenance that Biden or Kamala Harris would have at least tried to resist. And that's the sort of maintenance of an ongoing Israeli presence in Gaza, a green light on what Israel is doing in the West Bank, the sort of expansionist policy, the settler project, a kind of long-term future for Gaza, with Israel retaining at least a buffer zone and probably control of the north. All of this, I think, becomes something that the US would actively support under Trump, whereas under Biden, they would have opposed it and tried to push back against it. More broadly, though, I think, the point that Marina made is one I would also want to emphasize. Trump comes into office, I think, with a number of strong instincts in the region, but certainly one doesn't look to Trump for a coherent policy, and one doesn't look to him for consistency. He is unpredictable, and I think the elements that are there in his worldview, which, in the region, one might say, strong support for Israel, both Trump personally and very much the people around Trump, strong affinity for Saudi Arabia and the Gulf monarchies. I think there'll be a big impulse to work with Saudi Arabia, hostility to Iran, and opposition to getting the US involved in war. But it's not easy to bring together these different elements at this time. For instance, Trump, I think, will really want to double down on the trying to get a normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But, he'll put a lot of pressure on the Saudis to do that. But whether they would do that without a viable path towards a lasting and sustainable settlement in Gaza and a political track, ultimately leading towards the Palestinian state, I don't know. So I think, the complication of the region now will mean that some of his instincts are in conflict with some other ones.
Thank you. He's unpredictable, you said. But I heard him saying today, we are going to make America great again. And he has repeated many times that sentence. That's what has been said many times. If not through the respect of international humanitarian law and the promotion of democracy, then how exactly he's going to do this? Through the force or through military intervention? It seems to me that is a reminiscence of sentences from the Cold War, isn't it, Amy?
No, I think we're in a totally different world than the Cold War now, including in the region very much. Trump, the Middle East will not be his focus. And that was also true, for Biden until October 7th. Trump, maybe for different and some of the same reasons, wanting, or his advisors, people around him wanting to focus much more on China. But, where we will see differences will be in details of specific policies towards specific issues in specific countries, potentially. And of course, these details are huge for the people who will be affected by these policies. Most importantly, the Palestinians. So if we think about Biden's policy of, 95% support for Israel and 5% trying to constrain Bibi and providing some humanitarian aid and trying to soften the edges and soften the blow. I think, we don't know. Again, I would just say Trump is unpredictable and we're not sure, but just we can, guess that all that will be gone. I think there will be a real hostility toward any humanitarian aid. Certainly there won't be a desire to constrain Netanyahu's and his governmental allies, kind of their vision for greater Israel, because many of Trump's, closest advisors or people we could anticipate might be in this new administration, indeed, share that vision. I mean, Trump himself may not even have that vision. I'm not sure how deeply invested he is in it, but key constituencies and key supporters of his. So, for example, I think that we should take this push inside Israel for the resettlement of Gaza, seriously, that it's a serious thing, that some Israelis with ties to very powerful people in the government support, and they want this. And I believe that under a Harris administration, as Anthony was saying, there would have been pushback and resistance. Now, how effective that would have been from the US, who knows? But at least a little bit of resistance. I can't imagine that, there would be in a Trump administration, there might be active support for and encouragement for such a policy. So that is a change. That is a change. And it really, of course, matters for people in Gaza. And I think, what is unfolding in the West Bank, we can imagine what that's going to look like, and perhaps not just American sort of passive acquiescence or ineffective resistance to annexation of the West Bank, but perhaps active American support for it. And, maybe the bottom line, the end result is the same, but it's going to look and feel different. The other thing I want to mention is that we remember that in Trump's first term, he was very hostile toward foreign aid. And although foreign aid in the Middle East, U.S. foreign aid has really significantly decreased in the past 10 or 15 years, with a few exceptions in terms of Egypt and Israel and Jordan military aid, one thing that we could be looking for is to see how much hostility there is in the new Trump administration to these kind of legacy aid packages in, say for Jordan, for Egypt, with Arab countries that are in their own way, not on board with the Netanyahu plan and not on board for Israel's post-October 7th vision. So, of course, Biden's approach was to kind of manage these relationships and sort of quietly behind the scenes to push, Egypt or Jordan to work with us more, what this administration wanted. I could see with Trump using foreign aid and other levers to really play hardball and not being tolerant at all of the extreme opposition. Maybe it's feckless opposition, but among many Arab governments to, Netanyahu's vision. And that includes the Gulf. And that's where it's going to get very, very interesting to see what that relationship looks like with Trump.
Thank you.
Of course, I should just say, of course, the Gulf countries don't receive foreign aid. I should underscore that. So the pressure points would be different, but nonetheless, I think we will see some tension if those countries aren't actively, supporting Israel's plan that they're enacting right now for the region.
We are going to see that. Marina, again, Donald Trump was described by Kenneth Roth, the Human Rights Executive Director, as having an embrace of friendly autocrats. And he once described Sisi as his favorite dictator. And he has a special relation with Sisi, bin Salman, and Zayed. Do you think that they're now breathing a sigh of relief with Trump in office, and that you think he's going to be their lifeline to let them do whatsoever they like?
No, I don't. First of all, they don't need the United States. It has become quite clear that nobody in the Middle East needs the permission of the United States to do what they please. That has been amply clear in the last few months. Whatever the United States.
But they've got more support with the Trump, no? More support with Trump,
But Trump, they might get more support from Trump. But Trump is not going. There is no reason to believe that Trump is going to be any more successful than Biden in getting the Saudi Arabia or the other Gulf countries to change their policy, particularly Saudi Arabia, to change its policy toward Israel, unless there is a change of position on the two-state solution. I think Mohammed bin Salman has made it very clear, and I would be very surprised if he went back on that. He may sign a defense agreement, a security agreement with the United States, but not one that involves Israel as well. And I think that is not going to change. To go back for a moment to your initial question to Amy about whether there is a contradiction between this making America great again and, and then not having an assertive policy in the Middle East, keep in mind that Trump has always made it clear that the United States, essentially Trump tends to be an isolationist. He does not want the United States to spend a lot of its energy, and certainly not a lot of its money, in making the United States a central country in international conflicts. And I think he'll do that.
He will continue in the same way, yeah.
Yeah.
But I come back to say, Trump, among other promises, he said that he will not only stop Iran from getting the nuclear weapons, but also he will make the Islamic State join the Abraham Accords, and which is something new, and really that surprised me when he said so. Do you think that he will strike a deal with Iran that has also a pragmatic president, or to give the green light to Israel to target Iran's nuclear program? Which way he will choose?
Yeah, I lean towards a much more combative approach. I don't think he's actually that pragmatic. I think he's much more transactional. As was said earlier, I think he's unpredictable. I think, even going back to some of the earlier conversation, I think the other thing we've seen, while he may be isolationist in the sense of hesitant to always use military force, he has used it. We've seen him use it repeatedly. And we've seen him, build up the US military in terms of its budget higher than it had ever been raised. And he's promised to do that again. And his former national security advisor has written about how this administration, this new Trump administration, would sort of approach foreign policy on a peace through strength type approach. And so that does imply a little bit of bullying, and approaching a world in that way can lead to costs and can lead to scenarios where you have to take action. So I think where we've seen at times he's had restraint, I think we've seen other ones where he's clearly been willing to go in and assassinate the head of the IRGC, and as an example. So I think he's a bit unpredictable in that way. I think it's clear that he's gonna, surround himself with those who are Iran hawks. And so seeing a scenario where he gets to some sort of agreement with them is real hard for me to kind of wrap my head around.
Back to Antonio. Some liberal analysts think that with his obsession of striking a deal in business, Trump is likely to stand up against Israeli efforts to drag the United States in regional wars. Others are less optimistic, and they think, and probably more realistic, they think that he would give his consent to Netanyahu to transform Lebanon into another Gaza. Which of the two possibilities you think? Do you think, like all the others, that he's hawkish rather?
Well, I think, I think these are tendencies that will to some degree be fighting against the notion that, as Seth said, of peace through strength. I think he believes that that a kind of strong, forceful America will not have to go to war because it can use pressure and threats to get its way. I think he sees himself as a deal maker. And I think he would fantasize about a deal with Iran. But when you come to what the details of that would be, you know, and then more widely, a kind of a peace that would take in the extraordinary complexity and conflict of the region now, and the kinds of you know, changes in policy that would require from Israel. I simply think Trump doesn't have the commitment to diplomacy or the commitment to putting pressure on Israel that would be required for any of those things to come to pass. So therefore, I think, you know, I don't think that he will be the peacemaker. I think he will encourage the countries involved to bring the, you know, particularly Israel, to bring its conflicts to an end. But he'll let them define the terms on which the conflicts end. And I think, you know, Netanyahu is a skillful enough politician that he will frame his policies in the right kind of language to appeal to Trump. So I think effectively, Israel will be able to do, you know, whatever Netanyahu wants in Gaza and in Lebanon. I think Iran is perhaps a slightly more complicated factor, because I think, you know, what we've clearly seen from the Gulf countries is they don't want a regional war. They don't trust the United States to defend them if it does come to a regional war. We saw that last time, where they were rather disappointed with the degree of backup they got, you know, for attacks against their countries. So I think they are prepared, you know, they think the best way to preserve their interests is by de-escalating tensions with Iran. And I don't think that Trump ultimately will want America to get into a full-scale war with Iran. So my guess is he will tell Israel, do everything that you need to do up to the point of actually getting into full-scale hostilities with Iran, try and wrap up the conflicts in Lebanon or in Gaza as quickly as you can, and do whatever you need to do to get your forces to pull back. Unfortunately, I don't think that is going to be the basis for any kind of durable settlement. I think it'll be a very unjust and precarious peace, which will only encourage further resistance and chaos and misery for the people who live in those countries. So I can't be optimistic about his future as a peacemaker in the region, whatever he says.
Thank you. I come back to Marina. Speaking about these dictators in the region, in the same line, would a deal with Bashar al-Assad be possible through the help of Putin, in counterpart of, for example, Assad distancing himself from the so-called resistance acts and ignore Israel's incursion in Syria? Would that be possible?
Sorry, I don't think it is likely that Trump will have a particularly active policy towards a situation he does not need to address. In other words, right now, Assad is not a threat to the United States. There is no imminent reason for the United States to get involved there. And I would be very surprised if Trump was to initiate something vis-a-vis Assad. He's not, foreign policy, it's not at the center of his interests. As I said earlier, he tends to be an isolationist, and he has made it very clear before.
Okay. Do you agree, Seth, that he is an isolationist, that he doesn't like to get involved in some of the wars that are not necessary, or some troubles that are not necessary?
I mean, it's clear that he's been hesitant to engage militarily in various ways from his first term. I wouldn't say isolationist in the sense of I think he's much more transactional. I think he's going to be engaged in the world to how he sees it beneficial to him. And if some of that might involve military engagements, I think he will do so as he sees fit and as he sees as his benefit. So I'm a little I don't think it's that sort of old school isolationist ideology, but I do think he has those instincts that Dr. Ottaway is talking about, that is hesitant to engage and risk US forces in a way like we saw with the Bush administration.
Thank you. Amy, do you think that despite whatever we might say about Trump, he's going to put pressure on both antagonists in Sudan to end the war, or that he is not interested in that?
I have a hard time imagining him being very interested for all the reasons that we've been discussing about Trump's worldview, his priorities, his own framework for looking at the world, what he wants to do at home. You know, however, during the first Trump administration, we did see, there were a lot of foreign policy issues that he wasn't, interested in, but there still is this foreign policy kind of bureaucracy and machinery in the United States. So where there's a vacuum, we may see the Secretary of State or other players getting involved and kind of coming up with their own, approaches to these crises and these conflicts, whether it's the war in Sudan or other conflicts. Now, how far, that can go without Trump's sort of interest and attention and prioritization, we don't really know. And we also know that he's wants to put in place a bureaucracy and a team and a staff that is, incredibly loyal to him. So that'll be one thing. It's sort of hard to imagine how that would play out in terms of Middle East policy, but we can, predict that there will be much less kind of resistance or pushback from some of the members of his senior team on certain issues, right? So just, one example, we remember when Trump announced that, he was going to withdraw all U.S. troops from Syria, all 900 or, whatever the amount is in Syria of troops at that time. And then, there was a lot of pushback and resistance from within his administration, and he ended up, not following through on that. So I think we will continue to see on many, many issues, especially in this region, because it's not a priority for him. I mean, global issues are not a priority, and this region is not a priority within that lower priority. We'll see these kind of policy vacuums where people within his administration will be trying to craft solutions. Again, how far that will get and what difference it will make. But just given, if we look at the countries, the Arab countries that are direct, deeply involved in this war in Sudan, we've got Egypt on one side, UAE on the other. I think based on at least Trump's first term, we remember that there was a lot of support for Sisi and Egypt within Trump's first administration. But there's also a lot of support and intertwined relationships and connections to the UAE. So, who would the US who would a Trump administration try to choose in terms of the regional players to put pressure on? Hard to say. Probably not UAE, but who knows? I think there's just a lot of unknowns here on these second, third, and fourth order issues that we're talking about here.
Anthony, in 2017, Trump met Arab and Muslim leaders in Riyadh, and he assured them that he's not going to pressure them to democratize. what would we expect? More political prisoners in Bahrain, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates, and more executions in Saudi Arabia? In counterpart for more arms sales, for example?
Absolutely. I think there's, I've been saying Trump is inconsistent in some ways, but one way that he's very consistent is he seems to have, almost a kind of positive affinity for autocratic leaders internationally. He seems to find them easier to deal with in some ways than Democrats. And, I think he sort of aspires to a strongman model of leadership himself in the United States, and is very comfortable dealing with them overseas. I mean, I think, we have to really have some severe concerns about how he's going to approach questions of democracy and the separation of powers, independence of the Justice Department, the judiciary in the United States. And, the last thing that he's going to do is to put any pressure on any of the counterparts of the United States in the region to democratize. He will sometimes talk about human rights when it's convenient for him in terms of pushing back against Iran or against China, if we're thinking globally. But none of these things would stand in the way of him doing a deal with those countries if he saw that. It's purely instrumental. And, I think we have to brace ourselves for a period in which, from the center at least, these kinds of concerns really are absent from US foreign policy, I'm afraid. I mean, again, going back to what Amy was saying, in the first term, there was some elements within his administration had some freedom to pursue, initiatives on their own. But I think there'll be more of an attempt this time to get people who really share his worldview, and resistance to having people in the State Department or elsewhere who are sort of pursuing issues that are not aligned with him. So, rights, and I think we'll have to look elsewhere for countries that are going to prioritize those issues. I think the US last time he pulled the US out of the Human Rights Council, for instance, and very likely he would do that again too.
Thank you. Marina, again, I have read all the articles of my guests, most of them at least. I found them very interesting. In one of your articles, you said, although the country is not going to implode, and it's not going to implode because now that, thank God that Trump has won, so there's not going to be a problem of violence, etc. inside. And he said the United States will not pretend to be the shining city in the hill, as Reagan had predicted. Does that mean, is it because of its double standard policy? And I'd like to know what is the impact of that on the international law, humanitarian law, that on the international standards of United Nations, etc. What does it mean? It's a total discredit of that?
It has been a while since the United States really tried to enforce international humanitarian law. Keep in mind, we pay lip service to it, but we don't necessarily do it. We have allowed Israel, or we have not condemned Israel strongly enough for the violation of humanitarian law, for violation of international standards in its policy towards Gaza. So it's not that we are going to see a sudden change from a policy that was really focused on international law, on the international organization to a policy which is, totally oblivious to them. I think this has been the situation in the United States for a while. The United States did talk a lot about promoting democracy for a short period under the the Bush administration, and then it stopped already under the Bush administration. And one of the reasons why it stopped pushing that agenda, it got scared about some of the consequences of more democratic elections. One, when the Muslim Brother got a large presence in the Egyptian parliament, and two, when in 2006, when Hamas won the election on the West Bank. Excuse me, in Gaza.
In Gaza, yes.
And that really gave the United States a pause about pushing the democracy agenda.
Thank you. Amy, today I was reading something interesting, and the press is hinting to a proposal cooked by Israel and the United States and adopted by the United Arab Emirates. They're stating that Gaza will be governed by international authority with security managed by foreign and Arab troops, and the reconstruction will be funded by the Gulf countries, and this project will be led by the US, but Israel will be holding the ultimate veto. Would that be acceptable? Can we trust such claims?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, this sort of idea or plan has been, discussed for a while now. Maybe my fellow panelists have a different view, but I have a very hard time imagining any Arab government sending its young men to serve on the ground in Gaza as part of a peacekeeping force. I just absolutely cannot imagine that. Now, I might be wrong, but I have a very hard time where I sit right now imagining that. And I have a very hard time imagining the wealthy Gulf states putting in a huge amount, which is what would be required of their own resources. So literally investing in this project, which will be, I don't even have the words for it. I mean, a decimated Gaza doesn't, begin to go far enough to describe what we have there.
But they did invest in Iraq when the United States, but they did invest in Iraq when the United States asked them to do so.
What do you mean? In the Iraq war or?
In the Iraq war, yeah. The first Iraq war.
Yeah, I mean, that's a totally different world. 1991 first Gulf War, second Gulf War, whatever we want to call it, the pushing Iraq out of Kuwait. Yeah, there was a very token participation of certain Arab military forces in that operation. It was not militarily significant in any way, and that was by design of these Arab regimes. And only some of them went along with it. And that was in 1991. We were in a different world, and so that was a world where there was more unipolarity, more U.S. hegemony than there certainly has been for a long time. And it was a world in which the Soviet Union had just collapsed. I mean, it was as the Soviet Union was collapsing. And the George H.W. Bush administration could put very significant pressure on Hosni Mubarak, for example, to say, we need your participation in Operation Desert Storm. And if you do that, we're going to help you out economically. We haven't been in that world for decades. So I'm not sure. As I said, I can imagine some potential people who might have potentially important roles in this new Trump administration, foreign policy roles, wanting to see a vision like that in Gaza. Maybe not the international peacekeepers, because the UN, I think, will have it's absolutely not part of this equation. But how the Gulf countries would and other Arab countries would agree to participate, they would have to be out of their mind to do something like that. I mean, we're going to be seeing an insurgency and fighting and bloodshed in Gaza for years to come. I mean, Hamas is still there, and it's going to regain strength one way or another. And if Arab countries sending their troops, peacekeeping forces to basically fight in a way alongside Israel and enforcing, Israel's will on God. I cannot imagine something like that. But we may see the Trump administration liking some of that vision and wanting to push some Arab partners and allies toward it. That very much could be the case. I'm not even actually sure that Netanyahu, though, would go along with that vision. I don't think he wants international anything in Gaza. And frankly, I don't think that he cares whether or not there's reconstruction in Gaza. I don't think that's important to him. That's incredibly short-sighted and dangerous in my view, but I don't think he cares.
Seth, would you agree that the Arab countries will disobey if Trump asks them to do so, to send troops in Gaza or whatever?
It's hard to say. I tend to agree with much of what Amy said. I think it's hard to imagine. I think it's possible, as Amy said. I think it would require a lot of enticements in order to get there. And exactly what those might be, I'm not clear. But yeah, it's hard to see it.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to Marina again. You said in an interview that the causes of the Arab Spring were stagnation, authoritarianism, corruption, etc. And you were a bit pessimistic about the first Arab Spring in 2011. But you said at the same time that authoritarianism in the Arab world has no security valve, meaning that it's not like China where you have a strong economy, etc. Do you still think, does it mean now that the authoritarian regimes will one day or the other collapse because they don't have this valve you are speaking about?
No, I think, first of all, you have to differentiate among different types of authoritarian regimes. The Gulf countries, the oil-producing Gulf countries, have plenty of economic power to back their political system. They can buy off their population and so on. There are other countries that are more fragile. Egypt is forever fragile in terms of economy. Tunisia, it's another one, etc., etc. So, but I don't expect them to, those authoritarian regimes to just collapse. I think what the Arab Spring has shown us very clearly is that it's not so easy to get rid of an authoritarian regime, that they dig in and stay in. Even the uprisings of 2018 in the Sudan, in Algeria, that for a while seemed to be better organized and have more staying capacity, in the end they all lost out. And we know what, Algeria went back essentially to the status quo, and we know what happened in the Sudan.
Anthony, are you pessimistic about the future of democracy in the Arab world?
Are you asking me? Oh,
well,
no,
I think,
Anthony, sorry.
I think that both on questions of these questions of regional order and these questions of democracy and human rights, I think we really have to look to a period where the region is organizing things for itself. I think we've talked quite a lot about the United States, but as others have said, essentially, I think Trump is not going to want to spend a lot of time and pay a lot of attention and devote a lot of resources to the Middle East. I think he has other foreign policy priorities. Certainly, the US is not going to be pushing for human rights and democracy. The European Union, as you and I have discussed in our previous meeting, is very much focused on its own priorities in the region, which include migration, economic development,
security.
Yeah. So I think it's a period where it'll be up to people within these countries, social movements within these countries, to try and find causes and coalitions that are able to galvanize enough support internally. I think that there are real problems. I don't think that, again, particularly, as you were both saying, in the countries that don't have hydrocarbons, these are countries that are facing severe difficulties. When we're not seeing authoritarian regimes that are, stable and successful and answering the needs of their population, even in some of the countries with gas and oil resources, like Algeria, we're not seeing regimes that are able to meet the needs of their populations. And I think the kind of broader energy picture is also changing. The period of oil and gas is declining. Renewable energy is going to come to the fore. So I think there are going to be a lot of changes, social changes, which are going to affect all of these countries. And, I think that the populations will have to try and find a way of kind of instigating social change internally. The pendulum may swing, but for the moment, I don't see a strong impetus from outside.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, we have to rely on ourselves in order to make changes possible. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your useful insights. That was very, very important. I learned a lot from you, and sorry to keep you. You were last night waiting for the results of the elections with coffee, as Amy has, and now you have contributed to this. And I thank you so much for your contribution, and I hope to see you again. Thank you.